Now let's look at an Excel example for numerical data. Again, organizing and visualization. In organizing, we have the ordered array, which has some limited use. So it's just simply sorting the array. And then frequency distribution and cumulative distributions. That will be like the summary table in the contingency, in the categorical variable case. Okay. So let's look at an example from Excel. Okay. So we're going to use the data from table 2.8a, where we have the cost of a meal from 100 restaurants, 50 of them city restaurants, 50 of them suburban restaurants. So we're going to not make a distinction initially between where the restaurant is located. We'll simply look at 100 cost of a meal from restaurants. Okay, and we want to summarize those into frequency distribution and cumulative frequency distribution. So the data is given here in restaurant data. We have several columns of data, of which what we are interested in is in column G, cost of a meal, and there are 100 of them, city and suburban restaurants. Okay, go back to sheet 2. Now we can use pivot table in this case also, but there is another function called the frequency array function in Excel, which is also a very powerful function. So we will do both. We will look at the frequency function as well as the pivot table command. But to do the frequency function, we have to set up some initial values ourselves. We have to figure out what should be the class width. So now we have the cost data listed here. Now, should we prepare the frequency distribution for cost of a meal like from $0 to $5, $5 to $10, $10 to $15, or should we go $0 to $10, $10 to $20, $20 to $30? I mean, what should be the class intervals? So that is a very crucial decision that we have to make before we can apply the frequency table. And to make that decision, we need to understand the data a little bit better than simply looking at the values here. So the first thing to do is to get some information about the data, like what is the minimum value. So we can say min, okay, and we go here to cost, okay, like that. Okay. Now I have already named the column cost, so the name cost shows up. Okay. Sometimes it's easier to name the column, so and then it makes setting things up easier if you name the column. So naming the column would be like, if you want to name all of these columns with the column labels, then you can go here to the top and highlight the entire data set like that, and then you go to formulas, so create from selection, and then we don't want the left column to be names, we want the top column to be names. So the first row in the data set will be used as name for the rest of the information in the column. So if you do that, then cost would be starting from row 17 all the way to the end. Okay. Now max, again, now see, if you simply say cost, you don't have to go and highlight the data anymore. Okay. Count, how many are there? And since this is a numerical variable, count will work. If it is a non-numerical variable, we have to use count A. Okay. So now we have to find the range. Range is maximum minus minimum. Okay. Now this tells us that the cost of a meal it has a $55 range from minimum to maximum, and there are 100 observations in that range. So now how do you want the class intervals to be? So we want to make sure that the first lower limit, the very first lower limit, covers the minimum value. So maybe we can try. So this is a trial and error situation, so that maybe we can use 20. And the range is 55, So maybe we can have like 5 or 6 class intervals. So maybe if you have a class width of $10, so 55 will be approximately about 5 class intervals. If you have 6 class intervals here, 6 times 10 will be 60. So you make up these numbers. So if you do this, then the approximate number of classes will be, if you take the range, you divide by the class width. That will give us the number of classes. Of course, we want this to be rounded up. So if you use round up, and when you do round up, you have to give how many decimal places you want to round to. So you say 0. So that gives us, we're going to have 6 class intervals approximately. So you can change this. Suppose if you say you want 5 as your class width, then you end up with 11 classes. Yeah. And you want the class width to be somewhat reasonable number. You don't want class width to be like 5.5 or 8.2 and so on. And that doesn't make any sense at all. You want some really nice numbers, right? Nice round numbers. So 5, 10, 15, those are the kinds of things that are reasonable. So how many classes would this be? With 5 as class width and 11 classes better, or 10 as class width and 6 classes better? Well, that's an individual's choice. Usually, you don't want too many classes or too little classes. You don't want like only 2 classes. Okay, so that summarizes the data way too much. So you lose some insights. And if you have way too many classes, you're spreading thin. And that also would obscure the information, so you may not gain much insight. So anywhere between, I think, 5 classes to 10 classes, 10, 12 classes, in that range, it's okay. So you can either choose 10 class width, 6 classes, or you can choose 5 as class width, which will give you 11 classes. Either one would be okay, but 11 being a little bit on the too much side, I prefer 6 classes. 6 classes is perfect. Okay. Now for the frequency function in Excel to work, you have to start with the upper limit of the first class, and you only give upper limits. So the frequency function will automatically figure out what the lower limit will be. So the upper limit here is the first lower limit, okay, plus the class width. And I've already named this cell as class width. Okay. So it comes up with class width. So if you have the name of a cell, name of a cell acts like a absolute cell reference, which is what we want. Okay, so that's our first upper limit. Okay, let's align this like that. So the next upper limit will be, okay, the previous upper limit plus the class width. That will be the next upper limit. So now you copy and make sure that the last upper limit would cover the maximum value of 80. So we have 80 here. Okay. Now the frequency function in Excel uses the upper limit as inclusive. Okay, upper limit is inclusive in the class. So for example, here the upper limit of 30 is inclusive. So if you have a value of 30, 30 will go to this class and not that one. Okay, so over 30 and less than or equal to 40. Over 40 less than or equal to 50. So those are the ways in which the class interval would be interpreted by the Excel frequency function. So okay. So now we have the class limits. Now we can set up the frequencies. And the frequencies should be set up in this fashion. This is an array function. So it's very important to pay attention here. Okay. You normally in Excel, you'll just type in a function and you'll copy. Okay. That's the regular function. But this is not a regular function. This is an array function. So you enter the function to a range of cells all at the same time. Okay. So you have to first, there are 3 things you have to do. You have to first highlight the range into which the function should go. Okay, it's not a single cell, it is a range of cells. And then you type the function itself, which is frequency. Frequency, you need to give two things. First thing is the data. So the data is right here. That's the cost data. Okay. So that's the first thing. Okay. We could have done just simply cost also. That would have worked. So if you say simply cost, okay, so that's the first one. And then the bins array. So these are the bins into which we want to count. So again, you have to highlight the entire bin range. Okay, and close parenthesis. That's the second step. First step is to highlight the range into which the frequency function should go. The second is to type the function. Okay, don't press the enter key, because if you press the enter key, everything will be messed up. So after this, now to tell Excel that this is an array function, you have to press the Control Shift key. So do that with this hand. Okay, keep it depressed. Don't let it go. Control and Shift, and then you press enter just once. Okay, now you can let go of everything. So now we have frequencies for each of the class limits. Remember, this is 30 and below. So this is above 30, less than or equal to 40, and so on. So now if you add all these frequencies, that should be equal to the total number of observations. There are 100 restaurants, so everything is now counted. That you need to make sure that that is so. So now we have a frequency distribution of cost of a meal in these restaurants.